We are talking about lipids today. And so the word lipo means fatty, and lipid refers to three major categories: triglycerides, phospholipids, and sterols, or better known as steroid hormones. Okay? So these are coming from different types of lipids. Lipids all contain carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. That means that they are non-polar. And because they're non-polar, you know that they are hydrophobic. They do not dissolve in water. So remember, we have that little saying, like dissolves like. So non-polar is going to dissolve in non-polar, polar dissolves in polar. So water and oil, they don't mix, right? So lipids, they provide us with energy, okay? And they insulate the body. They protect the body. Especially if you're talking about like a pregnant mom, she puts on a lot of fat to be able to not only feed the baby and give the baby energy, but also to protect her body from that kicking maniac machine that's inside of her, okay? All right? And then, of course, we make the steroid hormones, we make bile salts, we make the sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. Those are all types of steroids, and we use them for reproduction. Fat-soluble transport of nutrients, too. Some nutrients that we eat, and we'll talk later about, like, for instance, fat-soluble vitamins, they have to be able to dissolve in fat. They're transported in fat throughout the bloodstream and through the body. And then, of course, they contribute to the structure of our cell membrane because we're using these fats to make phospholipids, and we're using these fats to make cholesterol. Now remember, even if you have a patient or even if you have a person who is completely vegan, okay, they're not eating any animal products at all, they're still going to get cholesterol in their diet. Typically, we get cholesterol from eating animal products. But even if I eat plants, and I eat plants that have fat in it, my body is able to then produce cholesterol. And if you remember, this is through that de novo synthesis thing. I have to be able to produce this cholesterol because I need it in my cell membrane. I need it to be able to make the hormones that are required. But I'm going to have to eat a lot of fatty plants in order to do this if I'm not eating any animal products. Okay? So, triglycerides, let's go over this just really quick. You know that they have this glycerol portion, and then they are attached to an acid portion, and that C double bond OO is a carboxylic acid. And then the acid portion is attached to a carbon chain. And depending on how long the carbon chain is, we give each of these triglycerides a different name. So let's say this carbon chain was 8 carbons long, it would have a certain name. If this carbon chain was 12 carbons long, we'd call it a different name. The acid portion plus the carbon chain is referred to as a fatty acid. And we use fatty acids as our big energy source. So we use an enzyme called lipase. And the job of lipase when we're breaking down fats as energy is to cut 2 carbons off the chain at a time, and then this becomes acetyl coenzyme A. Do you remember that? That's in that glycolysis citric acid electron transport cycle. And acetyl coenzyme A is what starts the citric acid cycle. And from there, we can then make ATP. And we can cut 2 carbons at a time and convert those 2 carbons at a time into acetyl coenzyme A. So that one triglyceride molecule will give us about 9 kilocalories of energy. That's a lot. Okay, and this is 9 kilocalories of energy per gram, basically, which is basically 1 molecule. Just like with carbohydrates, if I have carbs or I use protein as my energy source, it only gives me 4 kilocalories of energy per gram. So that I can get 2.5 times the amount of energy for my body by burning fat than I can by burning carbohydrates or burning protein. So this is a picture of a triglyceride, and again, this is the glycerol portion, and then the long chain here is the fatty acid portion. Foods with long chain fatty acids are 14 or more carbons. We do have what are also called medium chain fatty acids, and these are about 8 to 12 carbons long. So for instance, if you're doing the keto diet, you'll hear people talk about MCT or MCT oils, medium chain triglycerides. They're the same thing as medium chain fatty acids. An MCT oil would be like olive oil or coconut oil. These seem to be the easiest to digest in the human body and provide us lots and lots of energy. So that's why they're recommended quite often, these type of medium chain triglycerides. Short chain fatty acids or short chain triglycerides will have 8 or fewer carbons in the chain. Now remember, we have saturated fats, we have unsaturated fats, and then we have trans fats. And this would be saturated triglycerides, unsaturated triglycerides, and then trans fats. If it is saturated fat, you're going to see double bonds between the carbons, which means about that many hydrogens. If it's an unsaturated fat, you're going to see single bonds between the carbons, which actually means a few more hydrogens. If it's a saturated fat, it comes from animals typically, but we know there's some saturated fats of plants like avocados, coconut, olives, so there's a few plants that have it, but mostly from animals. This is mainly plants, or we can just make it up as we go, and we make some saturated fats completely in the laboratory. Don't even use a plant as the base for it. Saturated fats, when heated up even at low temperatures, become trans fats. And of course we know that trans fats are carcinogenic, especially causing colon cancer. And I don't know if we talked about this, but just so that you know, the National Institute of Health 2 weeks ago came out with something that was kind of unprecedented. Usually you have to go in to get a colonoscopy about the age of 50 to see if you have colon cancer. And then you should have it done about every 10 years because colon cancer is actually a fairly slow growing cancer. So if you have it done about every 10 years, you can catch it before it's too late. However, NIH said the other day that they are now recommending that Americans start having colonoscopies at the age of 30. That's crazy. But they're seeing such high rates of colon cancer in young people, it's ridiculous. So they're recommending you go in. And this is because you're being exposed to so many trans fats. Matter of fact, to keep all that processed food from going bad on the shelves, what they do is they also add trans fats to it, because trans fats really don't go rancid very easily. They don't go bad. And so these things can sit on the shelves for 6-8 months and they're still good, and you can eat them and they can still make their money off of them, which means that you're not only having to heat up unsaturated oils to get trans fats, you can just eat them in processed foods too.
I think you have the saturated fats mixed up with the unsaturated.
I do, don't I? Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm just a dummy. Thank you.
So when you have monounsaturated, that's just one hydrogen ripped off.
Yes.
Right.
So you have one double bond. If I have monounsaturated, I have one double bond in my carbon chain. If I have more than one, now I'm poly. So even if I have two, we typically call it poly, although it's officially di-unsaturated. 3 or more is definitely what would be considered polyunsaturated. The more unsaturated it becomes, the easier it is to turn it into a trans fat. Now, by the way, on the sides of your packages that are the processed foods, what you're going to see, instead of them saying trans fats, they call it hydrogenated, unsaturated fat. This is the same thing as trans fat. So some cities have actually made it illegal for restaurants to cook with trans fats, which means, like in San Francisco, it's now illegal for you to go out and eat and they cook with a trans fat. So that means they can't cook with soybean oil anymore. They can't cook with corn oil. What they actually have to do is they have to cook with animal products. So for instance, if you're cooking with the fat from a cow, cow fat is what we would call tallow. So this is beef fat. And if you're cooking from a pig, this is what we would refer to as lard. And so tallow is less expensive than lard, so most of these restaurants have actually gone back to using lard as a way to fry their foods. And in the United States, that's what restaurants started out with, is cooking most of their foods in beef tallow. Like McDonald's, they used to cook all their French fries in beef tallow until they were told, well, this is bad for people, so then they started cooking in trans fats. And now they're told this is bad for people, so they're going back to beef tallow. I don't know what that restaurant's supposed to do. It's like, in the United States, it's just schizophrenic or something, and we don't know what to do. So they just keep following what everybody wants, and they keep making money, which is very smart for them. So depending on the size of the chain of these carbons in the fatty acid will also tell you what it does for the body. So certain lengths of chains do different functions in the body, and we can talk about that later. And I also put some charts in here so that you guys can look at those. Some of these will also tell you, for instance, the grams of fat in different substances. And then this tells you the length of the chains, so how many carbons are in these chains. So for instance, olive oil is mainly a 16 carbon chain, okay? Butter comes in different lengths, but again, mostly a 16 carbon chain, very similar in structure to olive oil. It also has some 18 carbon chains in it. Same thing with beef tallow. Mostly 16 carbons and a mixture of 18 carbons. So olive oil, butter, beef tallow is going to act pretty much the same in the body as the other. Coconut oil is a little bit different. It has mostly 12 carbons with a little 14 in it, so it's a little bit smaller of a chain. But each of those then plays a different function or a different role in the body. So I actually got it right on the overhead instead of on the board. So you can see this is a saturated fat with the single bond between the carbons. And then this would be the unsaturated fat with the double bonds between the carbons. Okay? Now with the single bonds, okay, notice how the carbons are bonded to each other. And in the double bonds, notice how they're bonded. So the carbons with single bonds have this kind of up, down thing, okay? And then the double bonds are flat. The flatter bonds are what we call a planar bond. And what is the big deal about a planar bond? Does anybody remember?
Do a lot to like break them?
Yeah, they're very difficult to break. They're very hard to digest. When you have these bonds that are at an angle, they're a little bit easier to break, a little bit easier for us to digest, and far easier for the body to use as a fuel source. So cutting off these two carbons at a time becomes a lot easier. And when I say easier, what I mean by that is it doesn't take as much energy to break those two carbons at a time, which then allows the body to use those carbons for more energy. If these were all flat bonds, we wouldn't get very much energy out of fat at all, because it would take too much to break the double bonds in order to get the fat into the body. Now, from nature, fatty acids can become rancid. Okay, so if you've ever smelled butter that's gone bad, it's not a really pleasant smell. It's very pungent and it absolutely does not taste good either. So one of the things you have to do obviously is, refrigerate that fatty acid, whatever it is, except now we've developed these trans fats, these hydrogenated saturated fats, and what they do is they prevent this rancidity. They allow things to sit in your cupboard for much longer periods of time. But the interesting thing that I find is, like, for instance, if we're going to give people medicine, okay, for the most part, we have to test the heck out of that medicine before you can give it to a human being. But these people who are coming up with foods in the laboratory, they don't have to test it at all before they sell it to you and say it's food. They don't even have to know what it does to your body. They just stick this stuff together and off it goes and you have to eat it. Which just, I don't know, it's mind-boggling to me. I don't know how they get away with that. So again, this hydrogenation, okay, is what we're doing is we're adding some hydrogen gas to this fat, and it allows the fat to become more stable. It's more solid at room temperature. It's kind of more on the feeling of like that Crisco lard stuff. So when you eat it, it gives you more of a feeling that you're eating like butter. You get more of that sort of feeling to it, although it has nothing to do with butter. It's 100% trans fat. So most of the dietary intake of trans fats is derived from manufactured foods. And these foods contain this hydrogenated fat. So margarine, for instance, is anywhere between 40 to 50% trans fat. But they tell you that this is better for you than eating butter. Butter has 0 trans fat in it. So how could that be better? I have no answer for that. Okay. We know that trans fat increases your risk of colon cancer. We also know from many, many scientific studies that trans fats increase your risk of atherosclerosis. So what is atherosclerosis? Hardening of the arteries. So you're getting this plaque buildup inside the arteries, okay? And we know that trans fat causes this problem. Now, what do you think the percentage is in the average American's diet of eating these types of pre-manufactured foods? Think about somebody you know, maybe even yourself. What's the percentage of these pre-packaged microwave oven, open the box, don't really have to cook much foods? What's the percentage you think is in the average American's diet?
90%.
It is between 72 to 90% of the average American's diet. And what that tells us is we're consuming a lot of chemicals that lead to cancer and atherosclerosis. So it's no wonder the risks of cancer and the risks of hardening of the arteries is going up in this country. It's higher than it's ever been. And changing to a high-carb, low-fat diet was supposed to make us more healthy. And it absolutely has not. Now, there are what are called the omega fatty acids. So you have an omega-3 fatty acid, you have an omega-6 fatty acid. There's also an omega-9, but it doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, so I kind of left that out. Now, scientists have known for many, many years that omega-3 fatty acids, and remember, these are the carbon chains on that triglyceride. These guys play amazing roles in the human body in decreasing atherosclerosis. Now, here's what I always find interesting. Let's say that I am a patient who I have found out, like maybe that nurse in the video, that one of my arteries is 90% occluded, and occluded means blocked. So it's 90% blocked with some kind of plaque in my artery. And I go into my cardiologist and they say, oh look, your artery is 90% blocked. We need to do something about this. And the first thing that cardiologist is going to recommend to me is to consume high doses of omega-3 fatty acids. Now that does not make any sense to me because all omega-3 fatty acids are saturated fat. Why, if saturated fat is what causes cardiovascular disease and atherosclerotic plaque in my arteries, would my cardiologist tell me first thing you need to do is start taking fish oil or flaxseed oil or eating a lot of salmon that is wild caught, not raised on a farm, because it has lots of omega-3 fatty acids in it? Well, the reason that they're doing this, and maybe they don't even realize it themselves, is because like dissolves like. Now, if you noticed on that video we watched, one of the things that was shown in several different scientific studies is that if I eat a high, very healthy, saturated fat diet, what's going to happen is my triglyceride levels, the fats that are floating around in my blood, are going to drop. Now, how weird is that? You would think they went up, but they will drop. If I eat a high, healthy fat diet, my HDL, which we'll talk about today, will go up and my LDL will go down. And I don't care who you talk to, if they believe in high carbohydrates or low carbohydrates, it doesn't matter. Everybody believes HDL is good and LDL is bad. And you want HDL to go up and LDL to go down, period. And every doctor will tell you that. They will tell you don't consume a lot of omega-6 fatty acids though, because this will lead to atherosclerosis. Well, where do we find omega-6 fatty acids? In unsaturated fat. Now, why would my cardiovascular surgeon tell me don't take a lot of omega-6 fatty acids in if unsaturated fat is good for me? See, I think the doctors are a bit confused themselves because they go to school, somebody tells them this, they don't know why they're telling them this because their government told them to tell them this, and it just doesn't make any sense. I don't get it. Now, the other thing that I think is interesting is the place that you can get the highest concentration, the kind of food you can get the highest concentration of omega-3 fatty acids from, it's disgusting, but it's cod liver oil. It is just packed with omega-3 fatty acids. And this is what I don't understand. Who in their right mind thought about taking this fish called a cod, cutting out its liver, and then squishing it until oil dripped out of it and then drinking that. It does not make any sense to me. Who would even think of doing this? But somebody did, and they were right. And for hundreds of years, it was like this wives' tale, drink cod liver oil and you'll be healthier. And dang, they were right. And we all know it. Again, no matter what kind of diet you think you want to eat, consuming cod liver oil, everybody will agree, this is good for you. It's gross, but it's good for you. Now, one of the omega-6 fatty acids is called linoleic acid, and an omega-3 fatty acid is called alpha-linoleic acid. These are fatty acids that we need in our diet, so there has to be a ratio. You want more omega-3s, less omega-6s in your diet. So when you're eating corn, you are going to get some the linoleic acid in it. You'll get some omega-6s. If you're eating wheat products, you'll get some omega-6s. It's just you want to have a ratio of more of the alpha than the other. Because that way you can make sure that your arteries are going to stay clear. Which of course means you're eating more fat, saturated fat, and less carbohydrates. Point that out to your Dr. Jordan. That's a weird one. All right, another type of fat very important to our body are the phospholipids. And if you remember, these are found in our cell membrane, and they're making up that phospholipid bilayer, okay? And we have this region here, and then we have these guys. So what's the little ball region referred to as? The head. And these guys down here? Tail. Okay? And the head, polar or non-polar? Polar. And so that means the tail is non-polar. And so polar is hydrophilic, hydrophobic? Hydrophilic. And then the tails would be hydrophobic. Okay? And so those tails are fatty acids, and this is why they fall under the fat category. The phosphate group and the nitrogen group are in the head, and so that's what makes it polar. And the nitrogen groups also contain something called choline. Now, one of the problems with eating certain types of fats is that they can actually incorporate into and become part of the phospholipids, so that your fatty acid chains are incorrect and unstable. And then your cell membrane can become unstable, especially when you're eating tons of trans fats. Okay? Phospholipids also play a vital role in emulsifiers in food. Do you remember what an emulsifier is? Like bile salts are a type of emulsifier.
It breaks it down.
Exactly. These are chemicals that help to digest or break down foods. So you might see on the side of the package, it'll say choline, okay? But this is a type of phospholipid that they actually make in a laboratory, and then they add it to food because it's really good at helping to break down the fats. Something else that you should know is that lecithin is a type of phospholipid we find in the human body. It has a certain fatty acid chain, and this also contains choline. And this lecithin is a major phospholipid within our cell membrane. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind as we talk and go along. So how are lipids digested, absorbed, transported in the body? Well, one of the really important enzymes that we already talked about that helps to break down fats is that lipase enzyme. And I think we talked about this before, but I'm just going to write it up there just in case. One of the ways to inhibit lipase is to have a high insulin level, so that our body is not able to break down fats and use fats for energy if we've eaten a lot of carbohydrates, which of course that makes perfect sense. the body's just trying to conserve energy. So if I just ate, you know, a candy bar, then why would my body want to burn down or burn apart fat for energy? Because I just ate the candy bar. That just seems wasteful. And so insulin is able to decrease lipase. Which, by the way, one of the other things you want to say to your patients is when they're exercising, they don't want to eat any carbohydrates about 45 minutes before they start to exercise or 45 minutes after they exercise. So all this pre-workout stuff with all these carbohydrates in it is really, really bad for fat burning. Because you want the fat to burn, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why you do this exercise stuff, because you want the fat to burn. But if I'm eating carbs before and I'm eating carbs directly after, my insulin levels will stay up for long periods of time. And I'm going to really decrease fat burning, both during and after exercise. It's just highly recommended stay away from the carbs during that period of time. Now we also have a type of lipase that's in the mouth, and this is something we call lingual lipase. So we do get a little bit, not much, but a little bit of breakdown of fat in the mouth, which is why you can kind of feel, sort of kind of taste the fat when it gets in your mouth when you put butter in there. So it's not a horrendous amount of breakdown, but it allows us to be able to taste this stuff a little bit more. Once the fat enters into the stomach, breakdown of fat is only going to really occur by the fact that we have some hydrochloric acid in there. The big time breakdown of fat is happening in the small intestine. So maybe you remember the hormone cholecystokinin, or CCK. As soon as fatty products enter into the small intestine, into the duodenum, cholecystokinin is released. And its major job is to cause the gallbladder that sits right there by the liver to squeeze. And what do we store in the gallbladder? Bile. So we have what's referred to as bile or bile salts, and we have lecithin. We've got those both inside the bile. And so these are both considered emulsifiers. They have the ability to start to break apart fat so that we'll be able to absorb these products through the walls of the small intestine, get them into the bloodstream, and use them. So both the cholecystokinin making the gallbladder squeeze and release that bile, and then the choline or the lecithin are going to help to digest it. Do you remember by any chance what the name of the hormone is that then causes the liver to make more bile? Starts with an S. Anybody remember?
Secretin.
Secretin, very good. That's going to help us to make bile for the next meal, and we're ready to go again. Excellent. Now, bile, what it's going to do is usually fat, and you've seen this, you dump some olive oil in water, okay? The olive oil is all going to kind of like adhere together in this one big droplet or this one big glob of fat, right? And what we need to do is we need to, in our small intestine, we need to break it apart into little teeny tiny droplets of fat, and those little teeny tiny droplets of fat we call micelles, okay? So we're going to break this big glob into those little droplets, and that's what lecithin and that's what the bile salts are doing. They help us to break all this fat into the little droplets. Now, those little droplets can then be absorbed through the wall of the intestine, and they're going to be absorbed not into the bloodstream. So they're going to be absorbed into this specialized vessel, which is what we call a lacteal. This is a lymphatic capillary. It's not a blood capillary. And that's because those micelles, they're still too big to be absorbed directly into the bloodstream. But these lymphatic capillaries, they're a little bit special because what they have is they have valves. So if I have this little droplet of fat, the little droplet of fat is heavy enough that it can push down on this valve and cause it to open. And then the fat enters into my lymphatic system. And of course, you know, the lymphatic system will eventually dump into the bloodstream, and then all the blood has the fat in it, and we can deliver it to the body. But we're going to first put this into the lacteal, into those lymphatic capillaries, because they're just still too big to be absorbed into the bloodstream. So this is just a picture of those little micelles, and you can see the bile salts wrap around the little droplets of fat, and those little droplets of fat then are absorbed through the wall of the intestine and then into this lymphatic capillary or into this lacteal. Okay? Any questions about that so far? Okay. Now, another thing that's very important about fat, and we kind of touched on this a little bit already, is that fat is necessary to help us to produce steroid hormones. And the kind of fat that we use is cholesterol. And so most of our steroid hormones are coming from cholesterol. So what I did in this overhead is I just put a few of the different steroid hormones that are mainly made in the adrenal glands. Okay? So these are mainly produced in the adrenal cortex. And you might have heard of some of these, like, for instance, progesterone, aldosterone, testosterone and estrogen, cortisol. Now, of course, this one is inaccurate. Adrenaline, noradrenaline. That should be epinephrine, norepinephrine. But they are not considered steroids, or are they considered steroids? Is epinephrine and norepinephrine a steroid hormone? Do you remember?
Are they neurotransmitters?
Well, they can be a neurotransmitter. They can also be a hormone. Are they a steroid hormone? Do they get produced from fat? What's your guess? Your best guess? No, that's a good guess, because they're not. They're actually made from amino acids. Some malabsorption of fat problems. Okay? So some people, when they eat fatty foods, they're not able to absorb them very well. And one of the problems could be because they have pancreatitis. Now remember, the itis at the end of a word means what? Inflammation. So something has caused the pancreas to become inflamed. It could be stress. It could be a virus. It could be a number of different things, but they have inflammation of the pancreas. The pancreas creates a ton of different enzymes. And some of those enzymes are also going to help to break down the fat when it enters into the small intestine. So remember, the gallbladder is secreting bile into the small intestine at the same time that the pancreas is secreting digestive enzymes. But if somebody has inflammation of the pancreas, they may not be able to do that. Some of their digestive enzymes may not actually be able to be released, and they can't digest fat very well, which is a huge problem for them. And that means that the fat does not get into their bloodstream eventually. Instead, the fat gets flushed down the toilet. And one of the things we do see, and I know it's a little bit on the disgusting side to talk about this, but we see floating feces in the toilet. And one of the things that tells you is that there's a lot of fat leaving the body instead of being absorbed by the body. And that could be pretty significant for your patient, because one of the problems is if I don't get the right fat supply into my body, I have all kinds of damage. And one of the most obvious is I'm very tired all the time. I just don't feel like doing anything because I can't produce enough energy. Cystic fibrosis is also a big problem. Okay, you know, cystic fibrosis is where the individual has difficulties with certain protein pumps on their cell. And those protein pumps, they don't work right, and so the person cannot keep enough water in their body. And a lot of the mucus of their body becomes very thick, and it becomes actually pretty salty, okay? And they have difficulty breathing. It's just a whole host of problems. But because they have so much mucus that is retained and made in the body, there's a lot of that mucus in the digestive tract. And the more mucus that they have in the digestive tract, the easier it is for things to just slip right on out. So that means that the food stuff that enters the small intestine moves through the small intestine too rapidly. And so there's not enough time to absorb the nutrients in their food. And that includes, of course, the fats in their food. And so they have a lot of diarrhea issues. Now, the biggest one that seems to be affecting more and more people in the United States, and it has been suggested that the reason so many people are affected with this problem is because our wheat supply is now mostly genetically modified wheat. And this is a disease called celiac disease. And in celiac disease, it really is actually, it should be called celiac allergies, because the person is allergic to a protein that is found in wheat. It's also found in barley. And this protein is called gluten. So you've probably heard of people who are gluten sensitive or they're allergic to gluten. It's become kind of more widely known now. Well, here's one of the problems, okay? Notice in this little picture here, this is the small intestine. And remember, in our small intestine, we have tons of villi. But when a person is allergic to gluten, and that protein gets into their small intestine, it creates an immune response, which is what happens with all allergies. We get an immune response. So if you've taken micro, you know it's a type, what? 1, 2, 3, or 4 response. Do you remember? It's a type 2. Very good. This is a type 2 immune response. And the immune system creates lots of histamine and all kinds of other chemicals to try to fight off this bad guy that they think that has arrived in the person's intestines. But what it does is all those chemicals actually mow down the villi. And if you look at the small intestine of people who are eating a lot of gluten, although they're allergic to it, they don't have villi. Now, because they don't have villi, they can't absorb food very well. And 2 things happen. 1, they have tremendous diarrhea. I mean, this person will eat, and they're in the bathroom within minutes, and they're there for a long time. So obviously there's not a lot of nutrition getting into their body, so you have these individuals who have extremely poor nutrition. And they have all kinds of issues. They have issues with their teeth falling out. They have issues with immune diseases. They have issues with bones being too soft. They just have all kinds of different problems. They'll get these really dark purple rashes on their skin, and eventually it can lead to intestinal cancer. One of the other issues is they get something referred to as leaky gut syndrome. Now, because all those villi are gone, they've been mowed down, the wall of the intestine is not as strong as it was before, and chemicals from your food can get through that wall that shouldn't. So now certain chemicals are getting through the wall of your small intestine, going into the bloodstream, and when they get into the bloodstream, the person's immune system freaks out again, because these chemicals should have never made it to the bloodstream in the first place, and now that they're there, the immune system goes, oh my gosh, we're having more allergies, and flips out. And you start having these weird allergic responses. And this is one of the reasons we believe that so many people are allergic to so many things nowadays. I was talking to a student a couple months ago, and he was just listing all the things he's allergic to, and I'm like, dude, what can you eat? I'm allergic to melons, I'm allergic to tomatoes, I'm allergic to beef, I'm allergic to chicken. I mean, literally, it was like a list this long of all the foods he's allergic to. He could barely eat anything. It was very strange. But it's because we see more and more of this leaky gut syndrome. And some people are also suggesting that even if, let's say I don't have a gluten allergy, but I do eat a lot of genetically modified foods, that GMOs are also creating the same type of response and giving me leaky gut syndrome. This is why probably a lot of you who have kids, you've been told you can't let your kids take like peanut butter sandwiches to school. Or like at my grandkids' school, there's a special table for these children who have allergies, and it's actually several tables of all these little kids that have to sit totally outside of the cafeteria in a different building in order to eat their lunch, because if somebody accidentally brings a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, these kids will go into anaphylactic shock just smelling it. They have allergies so bad. How many times when you were a kid in school did you hear about people who are allergic to peanut butter and jelly? I mean, that's like the American diet, okay? But now this is what is happening. People are becoming more allergic to kind of strange things we've never seen before, or tons of foods that we've just never seen this before. And so leaky gut is becoming very, very prevalent in the United States, which is just, I don't know, nobody's been able to explain it yet. Of course, one of the other problems is there's not a lot of money given by the government to do research on this either. So maybe, hopefully, in the future. Okay, so something else that I want you to know about is something called a lipoprotein. Okay, so look at this. Just erase a couple things here. If I call something an HDL or an LDL, what do you think of? Cholesterol, right? Okay. But HDL stands for high density lipoprotein. Okay? There's no cholesterol in the word at all. LDL would then be low density lipoprotein. Okay, so let's start out with lipids can't dissolve in water, right? So because they can't dissolve in water, what they have to do in order to be transported through the blood is they have to bind to a specific protein. And we call that an apolipoprotein. Okay? Now there's apolipoprotein A, apolipoprotein B. There's a couple different types of apolipoproteins that our lipids bind to. Okay? So a lipid plus a protein, we call it a lipoprotein. Now, we have a core of triacylglycerol, which is that glycerol backbone thing, and cholesterol. So in the middle here, we basically have some triglycerides and we have some cholesterol in this whole lipoprotein thing going on. So right here, this is the apolipoprotein, and these have a mixture floating around in the middle of triglycerides and cholesterol, and this is surrounded with a kind of sort of quasi-phospholipid bilayer. And this whole thing is what we would refer to as a lipoprotein. All right? So again, this is our center of triglycerides and cholesterol. This is our apolipoprotein. And then this whole ball type of thing is made up of a phospholipid bilayer with some cholesterol to keep it from being rigid. So lipoproteins transport lipids through our lymphatic system, throughout the bloodstream, and we have a type of lipoprotein called a VLDL. This is a very low density lipoprotein. It transports fatty acids to the heart, to muscles, and also to our adipose tissues. The low-density lipoprotein transports about 70% of all of the cholesterol to our cells. So any cholesterol our cells need to make steroid hormones, to make, put the cholesterol in the cell membranes, to keep them fluid, the low-density lipoproteins are transporting this to the cell. So they have a very important job. The high-density lipoproteins, on the other hand, they're a pickup and retrieval service. So what they do is they go out to the cells, they go out to the bloodstream, and any cholesterol that is in excess hanging around, they bind to it and take it back to the liver. So that you don't have too much cholesterol hanging around in the bloodstream, you don't have too much cholesterol hanging around inside the cell. The HDL will bind that and bring it back to the liver, and the liver clears it out of the blood so that your cholesterol levels are not too high. Okay? So VLDLs and LDLs deliver cholesterol to the body. HDLs take it from the body and deliver it to the liver. Now, none of those sound like terrible things, right? So the very low density lipoproteins, they tend to be very low in lean people who regularly exercise. And they're much higher in people who have coronary artery disease. So doctors said, oh my gosh, if you have high LDL or high VLDL, you're going to have coronary artery disease. Okay. You also can make your VLDL go up with excessive alcohol and with obesity and with increased carbohydrates. So if I'm eating more sugars and more starch, I'm going to see very low density lipoproteins. Is this not in your PowerPoint?
No, there's a lot that are missing.
Not a problem. As soon as class is over, I will re-update that. Sorry about that, and I'll put that all on there. So don't freak out. I'll put that all on there for you. I apologize. I thought I did it already. Oops. Okay. If you consume fish or fish oils, those omega-3 fatty acids, the VLDL levels in that person will be much lower. So if you consume saturated fat, you'll have lower levels. LDLs. A high intake of saturated fats, such as palm oil, will raise your LDL. This is a type of saturated fat that is anything but natural. But if you have a high intake of linoleic acid or medium chain fatty acids, this will reduce your LDL oils. Or stearic acid. By the way, linoleic and stearic acid both come from beef tallow. This will reduce your LDL levels. I'm just telling you the science that's out there. Now, why is it that doctors say that high levels of LDL, high levels of VLDL are going to cause cardiovascular disease? Well, a couple of other things have to happen besides you just have high levels. You also have to have a process called oxidation. And what oxidation does is oxidation breaks down the walls of your blood vessels and allows your immune system to come in and try to heal those broken blood vessels. So the endothelial lining of your blood vessels has to be broken down. And your immune system goes, oh shoot, this is a really bad idea. So then what your immune system does is it actually takes LDL and grabs a hold of it in your bloodstream and brings it to the blood vessel that is broken down and shoves that LDL into the inner lining of the blood vessel. And LDL is very good at helping to heal the blood vessel. But if it keeps breaking down and keeps breaking down and keeps breaking down, the immune system doesn't know any better. And it keeps bringing the LDL to this blood vessel and keeps shoving it into the lining of the blood vessel. So that what you see is kind of something like this. Okay, you have this blood vessel, and part of the wall has broken down. And so with the LDL, and I'll just kind of put this in blue, you should have the wall kind of like this on the inside with the endothelial lining, but this wall has broken down. So the immune system keeps bringing the cholesterol, or the LDL in particular, to this wall to help it to heal, because it's a really good source of chemical to help the wall heal. But as I keep bringing more and more of this LDL in, it keeps getting stuck in the lining, and eventually what happens is my lining starts to grow around it as I keep bringing more and more in. And now what just happened? Well, the diameter of my vessel, my artery, just got smaller. And this is what plaque in the artery is all about. But the wall had to break down first in order for my immune system to bring that LDL there to begin with. Well, how do we oxidize the wall? Well, one way is drink a lot of alcohol. That'll help you out. That'll oxidize the wall. Another way is lots of caffeine. That'll help. Another way is a lot of tobacco. That'll help oxidize the wall. Stress is really good because we release a lot of stress hormones. That'll really help us to break that wall down. Okay? And then eating a lot of processed foods with lots of carbohydrates causes oxidation of the wall. So it looks like you have this combination, which of course, God bless America again. We are totally stressed out, overworked, caffeinated culture that is under, too many problems in life, and maybe there's a little too much alcohol we're consuming too on the weekends, and then we're eating lots of carbs. Well, no wonder the walls of our arteries are breaking down. Easy. So even though we've kind of harped on, just because it's a nutrition class, I've kind of harped on, the carbs, you also have to add that stress in there, that alcohol, all of the other things that we're doing to our body. Those also are great in helping to break down the walls of our arteries and cause this plaque buildup and this atherosclerosis. We're really good at, creating this monster issue. Any questions about this? So the cholesterol itself has really good application for the body. It helps to heal the body. It's not really a bad guy until we do other things, and then we start to build up too much of it. Now the other problem is too, just so that you know, is as this wall builds around the plaque, it actually doesn't build very well. Those cells are not as healthy as the original cells. They're a little looser as they bond together. They don't bond as tightly, which then also means there is potential for this wall to break. And when that does, it actually will release chemicals that then will cause the blood to clot. And now when that clotting occurs, now you may have a fully occluded artery. So that's when you get that 100% occluded artery. It's usually not plaque in particular that does 100% occlusion. It's actually the breakdown of the wall creating a blood clot in there. And then one of the other problems is a lot of times somehow in all this plaque, calcium starts to build up and the plaque becomes calcified. When that calcium mixes with this blood clot, the blood clot becomes calcified. And now that blood clot hardens in there. And it's very difficult for it to move out of that area. And so that's why the occlusion becomes a really big issue, because you have this calcified blood clot with this calcified cholesterol fat mixture all in there, and then you just can't get that out of the artery. And if this is in the heart, that's why they do the heart bypass surgery. They'll actually take that artery out because it's gone, and they're going to put something new in. Now, one of the the other things we're going to talk a little bit more about as we go along is that fat is needed in order to dissolve certain vitamins. So vitamins A, D, E, and K, these are what we would call fat-soluble vitamins. And so once we take these in a vitamin form or we eat them in certain foods, these are going to go into our fat. And they're actually going to dissolve and be slowly released from our fat cells into the bloodstream. This is also why it's very, very bad to over-consume fat-soluble vitamins, because they can actually build up in our fat cells and then we can release too much of them into the bloodstream at one time. Although it's really kind of hard to over-consume these unless you're taking mega doses of vitamins. So if you're consuming these naturally in the foods that you eat, you're pretty good. But if you're consuming these with vitamins and you're taking too many, it can be a problem. Yeah.
Should we be taking dietary, like vitamins?
That is a fantastic question. And my answer to that is no. No one should ever have to take vitamins. But then there's reality. Because we shouldn't have to take vitamins if we're eating the right foods and if the foods were grown in nutritious soil. And one of the things that we're not really going to talk about in here, but that video did touch on, is we have a soil problem. And that is worldwide. Because this modern day agriculture destroys soil. And nobody cares. And soil is being destroyed at a horrendously rapid rate around the world, so that eventually there aren't going to be any nutrients in those foods that you do eat. So even if I'm eating organic, if that soil doesn't have any nutrients in it for my plant to suck up into it, and then I eat that plant, I'm not getting anything from that plant. So because our soil in the United States is so nutrient deficient, my answer is, yeah, you better be taking vitamins. Because we're not getting the amount of nutrients we should be getting, even if we're eating super well, super healthy, we're still not getting enough. Now here's the other part to this. You get from your vitamins what you pay for. Okay? So if you're buying cheap vitamins, you're probably not going to get much out of them. Because if you go to like a wastewater treatment plant, there's a lot of cheap vitamins there because they don't even dissolve in our system. They just come out the other end. And you see it. That is a huge problem in treatment plants. They have tons and tons of these undissolved vitamins. So you really want to get, if you're going to spend the money, you want to spend the money for a little bit better vitamin, maybe even liquid vitamins, okay? But yeah, we need them. There's no doubt. Oh, I think that's a double. So some of the other things that fat helps us with is to make what are called eicosanoids. And eicosanoids are certain types of chemicals. They're kind of sort of like hormones, and they help to regulate our immune system. Our immune system is very fat-based. Okay? Some of these eicosanoids are like something called prostaglandin, thromboxane, leukotrienes. Okay? And these guys are helping us as far as making sure our immune system is super healthy. So if you don't have enough what they call thromboxane A2, you're going to be in big trouble. Thromboxane A2 helps to decrease pain throughout the entire body. So if I can't make enough thromboxane, I have a lot of aches and pains all the time. And you'll get patients who come in and they just complain about aches everywhere in their body, and it's no wonder. Because if I don't have enough fat in my diet, I can't make enough thromboxane. And I feel achy. By the way, we can get a lot of precursors to eicosanoids from eating fish. One other thing about thromboxane A2, it helps platelets to cause our blood to clot. So that's another really important thing. Leukotrienes, they're going to cause inflammation, which, by the way, that might sound like a bad thing, But as far as our immune system is concerned, that's not really a bad thing. Sometimes we need inflammation to protect our system. Like if I hurt my knee, my immune system causes it to become inflamed so that I don't keep walking on it, and I can rest it and take care of it. So some of the medications we take, like aspirin, they actually block the production of leukotrienes so that it helps to take down inflammation. Your Motrin does the same thing. It'll block production of leukotrienes. We're not going to talk about this much, but vitamin D, super duper important vitamin. As a matter of fact, they're trying to even get its name changed so that it is not called vitamin D anymore. They want to call it a hormone because vitamin D appears to not really be a vitamin. It appears to be more of a hormone, but you can't even make vitamin D in the body unless you have plenty of fat, because our kidneys actually produce a hormone that is the precursor to vitamin D. And that hormone is fat-based. So the kidneys make that, and then that hormone gets under the surface of your skin, and then sun hits it, and it turns it into this vitamin D. So just to tell you how important the fat is. And then vitamin D also is necessary not only to regulate your immune system, but we use vitamin D in the production of our sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. We use vitamin D in the production of cortisol, which is very important in helping to regulate our stress levels. So it's going to be an important vitamin when we talk about it. Oops. Okay, so the recommended daily intake of triglycerides and cholesterol according to the United States government. Thought I would tell you this just in case you don't agree with the ketogenic diet. You should know this. Essentially, adequate intake of alpha-linolenic acid per day for men and women, 1.6 grams for men, 1.1 grams for women. Recommended intake for linoleic acid, which is the unsaturated. So remember, the alpha is saturated, linoleic is unsaturated. 17 grams per day for men, 12 grams per day for women. That is not very much fat. That's like you're consuming a couple tablespoons of fat per day. It's not very much. So they say if you eat more than that, you're going to have elevated triglycerides, and of course we call that hypertriglyceridemia. However, I don't know who they are that say this, but it's not the science that I read on PubMed. It says absolutely the opposite. The more saturated fat you eat, the lower your triglyceride levels. So I don't know where they came up with this at, but it is in your book, so I thought I'd write it down. They also say what are the best sources for fat in your food, and that would be unsaturated fat. However, don't eat trans fat. Don't eat cholesterol. Just saying. And we've already kind of talked about this. Where do we find these? This would be in vegetable oils, soybean oils, wheat germ. Okay. Although they do also say eat lots of omega-3 fatty acids, so I'm just terribly confused. I don't know what to do. Should I eat saturated or unsaturated? I don't know. And limit. Eat a lot of omega-3 fatty acids, but limit unsaturated. Yeah, anyway. I become more and more confused as I read these books. Some vegetable oils are good. So take coconut oil. That, according to your book, is good for you, which is definitely a saturated fat. But then also palm oil, which is an unsaturated fat. Again, I'm confused. I don't eat palm oil. I find it an ethical issue because they're cutting down all the rainforests for that, so I wouldn't eat that anyway, even if they recommend it. So, other sources of fat, well, we all agree, don't eat trans fat. Bad, bad, bad. Not good, bad. Really bad. Kill you bad. Okay? Just saying. But then also, Good sources would be like chicken, fish, eggs. Oh, that's all saturated fat. I'm confused again. There's no unsaturated fat in animals, okay? They're all just fat. Cardiovascular disease, we've kind of talked about this. Heart disease has been the #1 killer in adults in the U.S. since 1918. 1 in 3 Americans die of heart disease every 40 seconds. Ouch. I think it's about time we did something about this. It's just weird. We went through atherosclerosis, so I'm just going to kind of jump through there. One thing I did not touch on that I want you to know about is something called C-reactive protein. Now, C-reactive protein and then also something called homocysteine is very important for you to know. There are some people with a genetic defect where they cannot break down certain amino acids. And those amino acids create what we call homocysteine. And we know that the higher the homocysteine levels in a person's body, the more it will oxidize the walls of their arteries. So the greater the likelihood of atherosclerosis. Everybody agrees with this. There's also another protein that's made by the immune system. This is called C-reactive protein. And we use C-reactive protein as a marker. That means we measure C-reactive protein in people's blood. And the higher C-reactive protein is, the more inflammation the person has. And we know that inflammation is the #1 cause of cardiovascular oxidation. So the higher your C-reactive protein, the greater the likelihood of atherosclerosis. The higher your homocysteine levels, the greater the likelihood of atherosclerosis. Now, the other interesting thing is chlamydia can also increase your risk of atherosclerosis. And 1 in 5 American adults have chlamydia floating around in their bloodstream. 20% of American adults, and they don't even know it. It's very communicable. It's easily spread. So we spread this, you could have this, and it's a very rare test that your doctor's going to take a test to see if you have chlamydia. It's very rare. And I'm not talking sexually transmitted, although it can be sexually transmitted. I'm talking somebody coughs on you and you can get this bacteria. And it can cause oxidation of the blood vessels. And 20% of us have it already. Strange. I bet you'd never think of, could you test me for chlamydia? No, I mean a blood test. Okay. People don't usually do that. Very, very unusual. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about some different diets. And I'm going to have you guys pick a diet. And so one of these would be like the Mediterranean diet. And so you're going to be looking at things like, what are the characteristics of this diet? Can it reduce heart disease? What dietary recommendations would you give to someone who wants to reduce the risk of heart disease as far as this diet? What methods can be used to increase proteins? Because a lot of times in certain diets, protein is the one that's overlooked. How much is too much? How much is too little? That kind of thing. And so you're going to be answering a few of these questions. So we'll talk about this a little bit more. Don't get all freaked out yet. You might want to look at the different diets and see which one you guys want to talk about. But before I let you go today, we are scheduled to have our exam next week. Not going to happen. Okay? Because next week we have to talk about proteins. So we're going to reschedule it for the week after. Okay? All right, so I'll see you next Wednesday.